Welcome back, everybody, to Will_NACA Journey CA. In today's video, we're going to be discussing one of the most misunderstood topics surrounding the NACA program, the so-called 5-year rule. Quick disclaimer before we get started. I am reading from a prepared script for this video, and I am doing that intentionally because I want to communicate this information as clearly, accurately, and responsibly as possible. So that being said, let's get into the video. Intro. A lot of people online say, you only have to live in a NACA property for 5 years. Then you can move out and rent it. But after researching the topic much more deeply myself, I started to believe that explanation may be dangerously oversimplified. Because the biggest misunderstanding online appears to be confusing the 5-year conversation with what happens when someone still keeps the original NACA mortgage structure active. And from everything I've researched so far regarding owner occupancy, the original mortgage agreement, refinancing structures, and the $25,000 lien, the overall system appears far more nuanced than most people explain online. If people misunderstand this topic, it could potentially create very serious financial consequences later, especially for people researching duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, house hacking, or future rental income strategies. So in this video, I want to break down my current understanding of what the 5-year rule actually appears to mean, how occupancy requirements seem to function, how refinancing may potentially change the situation, and why there's so much confusion surrounding this topic online. Quick disclaimer. Quick disclaimer before we get started. I'm not affiliated with or employed by NACA. I'm simply documenting my own personal research, understanding, strategy, and journey through the NACA process here in California. This video is intended for educational and informational purposes only. Always verify mortgage rules, occupancy requirements, refinancing guidelines, legal obligations, and hardship policies directly with NACA and qualified professionals. I'm also continuing to research and learn more myself as I move through the process. Section 1. Where the confusion starts. One thing I keep noticing online is people simplifying the entire conversation down to just live there for 5 years. But based on the documents, discussions, occupancy language, and refinance scenarios I've been researching so far, that explanation appears incomplete. Because the occupancy requirement does not appear to function like a simple countdown timer that automatically disappears while someone continues keeping the original NACA mortgage in place indefinitely. And I think that distinction is extremely important because many people seem to assume they can wait 5 years, keep the original NACA loan active, move out, and fully convert that property into investment property afterwards. But from everything I've researched so far, those situations may not necessarily be treated the same way. And I think this becomes especially important for people trying to build long-term housing or income strategies around multifamily properties. For example, someone might someone might purchase a duplex through the NACA program, live in one unit for 5 years, then later move into another home while renting out both units of the duplex. A lot of people online speak as if that automatically becomes acceptable after 5 years, simply because time has passed. But from what I currently understand, the bigger question may actually be whether the borrower still remains inside the original NACA mortgage structure at that point. And that distinction appears to change the entire conversation. Section 2. Owner occupancy appears connected to the original loan. From my understanding, the NACA program appears fundamentally designed around long term owner occupied home ownership, meaning the borrower is generally expected to occupy the property as their primary residence while remaining inside the original NACA mortgage structure. And from my research, this appears to apply not only to single family homes, but also duplexes, triplexes, and fourplex properties financed through the program as well. Once I started understanding the distinction more clearly, the overall structure of the program started making much more sense. Because the program itself does not appear primarily designed for flippers, investors, or people trying to rapidly scale rental portfolios using owner occupied financing advantages. The core purpose appears centered around affordable owner occupied housing. And that distinction matters tremendously when people start discussing future rental conversations online. Section 3. The $25,000 lien. Now, this is another area where I think people become confused online. From my understanding and research, the $25,000 penalty people often mention appears structured as a soft second lien attached to the property. And that distinction matters a lot because this is not simply a random fee or punishment. It appears connected to the property itself and may potentially become enforceable under certain conditions tied to occupancy violations, depending on the terms of the agreement and NACA's enforcement policies. Once I started understanding that part, the logic behind the overall system made much more sense because the structure appears intentionally designed to discourage investors, flippers, and non owner occupants from misusing the program strictly as an investment vehicle. The overall purpose appears focused on supporting affordable long term home ownership, not short term investment activity. Section 4. Where refinancing may change things. Now, this is where I personally believe a lot of the online confusion begins. Because from what I've researched so far, refinancing appears to potentially change the structure of the original loan relationship itself. For example, someone might later refinance into a conventional mortgage outside of the original NACA mortgage structure. And from my understanding, that may potentially affect how the original occupancy requirements apply moving forward. But that situation appears very different from someone simply keeping the original NACA mortgage active, waiting 5 years, and automatically assuming the property can fully function as a rental afterwards. Those situations do not necessarily appear identical. And I think many online discussions accidentally blend these two completely different scenarios together, which creates a tremendous amount of confusion. In other words, refinancing out of the original NACA structure may potentially create a different legal and mortgage situation compared to someone simply keeping the original NACA loan indefinitely while moving out of the property. And this is also where things can become technically complex very quickly. Because once you start discussing liens, equity, loan positioning, occupancy agreements, refinancing structures, and enforcement mechanisms, The conversation becomes much more technical than many short online explanations make it seem. So I also want to be transparent here. I'm still continuing to research and learn more about how some of these refinance mechanics function technically because I don't want to overstate anything inaccurately. Section 5. Why this matters so much. I think understanding these distinctions is extremely important for people building long term housing strategies, especially people researching house hacking, multifamily properties, future rental income, or long term refinancing plans. Because misunderstanding mortgage obligations is not usually the kind of mistakes people discover immediately. Sometimes those issues may only surface years later during refinancing, property transfers, audits, loan reviews, or other major financial events. And from my understanding, violating occupancy agreements without proper authorization or approval, hardship circumstances could potentially trigger enforcement of the $25,000 lien structure depending on the agreement terms and NACA's policies. So this is definitely not something people should casually assume or overlook. Section 6. Possible hardships. Now, from my research, there also appears to be legitimate hardship situations where occupancy circumstances may need to change. Examples may potentially include job relocation, military transfer, family emergencies, health situations, or major life changes. And in situations like that, members may need to communicate directly with NACA regarding available options, approvals, or possible accommodations. But again, these situations appear highly case specific because every situation may involve different factors such as timing, occupancy history, loan structure, hardship documentation, refinancing status, and NACA internal policies, which is why I think it's extremely important for people to verify situations like this directly with NACA itself instead of relying entirely on YouTube comments, Reddit posts, TikTok clips, or internet options. Section 7. Why so many people misunderstand this. I think one major reason this topic becomes so confusing online is because mortgage rules are often discussed in isolated fragments instead of as a complete system. People hear 5 years without fully understanding how owner occupancy, refinancing, soft second liens, mortgage structures, and occupancy agreements all potentially interact together. And social media naturally tends to simplify complex topics into short explanations. But when discussing mortgages, contracts, occupancy agreements, and legal obligations, small details can matter tremendously. And that's one reason I wanted to make this video in the first place. Because affordable home ownership conversations deserve accuracy, not shortcuts, assumptions, or oversimplified internet myths. I think realistically, carefully, and transparent conversations around affordable home ownerships are extremely important right now. In closing, as I continue through the process, I'll be documenting research, strategy discussions, housing searches, NACA processes, REO opportunities, occupancy questions, and everything involved in navigating affordable home ownership step by step. Again, I'm not affiliated with or employed by NACA. I'm simply documenting my personal journey, research, and understanding throughout this process here in California. And I think more people today are looking for realistic housing conversations, careful research, accurate information, and transparent discussions instead of hype, shortcuts, or oversimplified internet explanations. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, make sure to subscribe and follow the journey. Real process, real steps, real home ownership. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.